Let's say money was a person and it showed up at your door. What would you want to say to it?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I have used you and abused you and ignored you. You're like, like I only pay attention to you when I need you, and then I leave you alone. I'm like the worst romantic partner you could ever have. It's terrible. I'm so sorry.
Welcome to Everyone's Talking Money, where we get brutally honest about money, mindset, and making life richer. Doug, let's just start off with what everyone's probably wondering. What the heck is an Enneagram? And why should someone who's trying to get their financial life together even care about it?
All right. So the Enneagram sounds complicated, but it's actually Greek. So Ennea means 9 and gram means drawn. So an Enneagram is just 9 things drawn together. And so what the Enneagram is, though, it's a personality typology system where there's so here's the deal. We've learned through, and this is what my book is exploring. It's really groundbreaking because the Enneagram is this ancient system that goes way, way back from the beginning of time, because it's really like the physics of consciousness. Like it's like who discovered mathematics? Like it's always been there. So who discovered the Enneagram? It's always been there. But we only really made some big breakthroughs into it in the late 20th century. There's these two guys, Oscar Chazo and Claudio Naranjo, who just, really brought it together. But the key point is that what we know now, and this is what the book is really teaching, is that we know from childhood developmental psychology and through neurobiology that there's really only so many ways you can form an ego. Think of it like cars. Like there's an infinite variety of cars, and yours is a unique make and model and unique to you. But there's only so many ways you can design a car and have it be roadworthy. And so in short, what the Enneagram tells you is what's the model of car that you're driving in your ego. And, there's 9 sort of basic models, just like there's SUVs, there's compact cars, there's sports cars, there's family sedans. But your ego kind of falls into one of these archetypal patterns, even though there's infinite variety inside each of these categories. So it's not really a rigid box. It's just like, oh, here's the ego defense mechanisms that you're sort of driving. Here's the thing that protects your ego. This is like the chassis you're driving around in. But the shape of it determines how you see everything. It determines how you're driving on the road, what kind of parking spaces you can fit into, whether you're good on the highway or whether you're good at off-roading. So that's just a quick teaser about it. And then we can go into much deeper about each of the types if you'd like.
That would be great. If we could take a step backwards real quick, because like money, I feel like the word ego, we kind of have a negative connotation to it, or we use the word ego incorrectly. Like when I think of ego, it's like, well, he has a big ego, like it's a bad thing, but everyone has an ego and it's not necessarily good or bad. It just is, right? Just like kind of money isn't good or bad. It just is. Tell me a little bit about ego first.
Oh, exactly right. Like you can't think of it like a car. You think of your consciousness, your sense of self, your self-awareness, right? That's inside the car. And then the ego is the thing that contains it, holds it together. Without an ego, you wouldn't have a personality to drive around it. But just like a car, you can have problems with it. You can have, defective cars. You can have good cars. You can have, bad suspension and a good engine, or vice versa. So what you want to do is try to get your ego as tuned up and souped up as possible, so you can drive the highway of life as smoothly as possible.
The Enneagram, is it just like another personality label, or does it actually help you stop self-sabotaging with your money?
You nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly right. So because the Enneagram tells you how you're driving around in life and doing everything, it also tells you how you relate to money. And that's what the book is exploring. Like, what are your money monsters? How does the car you're driving affect how you're, what I call the 4 pillars of finance, which is earning, saving, investing, and giving. So the Enneagram will tell you in those categories, like where do you have strengths and where do you have weaknesses.
So is it, you lean more towards positively reacting to earning more, and then the giving may be a little bit lower. That doesn't necessarily, rev your engines. If we're continuing with the car analogy, that doesn't get you as excited, or the investing. So does everyone kind of have a fall on a level of where they fit as far as their Enneagram goes?
Right. So let me just be clear. So the Enneagram just tells you the personality you're driving in. And then what I've done with the book, this is where the money part comes in. The Enneagram won't necessarily tell you about money, but my book is then taking the Enneagram and I layer. So there's these 9 archetypal patterns of personality in the Enneagram. And then what I've done is I've layered on top of that what I call the attachment theory of money, which is similar to the attachment theory of relationships, if you're familiar with that. But let me just explain. So, what the attachment theory of money says is that there's 2 ways we can have an unhealthy relationship to money. We can be either anxiously attached to it, like we're too, just greedy. I think Ebenezer Scrooge, like he's a good example of someone who is money anxious. And then there's people like me who are money avoidant, the way I grew up, who dislike money, who hate doing their bills, who hate budgeting. Tax time is just an absolute nightmare. All those things. So there's those of us who are really avoidant around money, and there's those who are anxious. And then here's the thing: is we can be jumbled. We can be anxious or avoidant in different parts of our financial life. So going back to those 4 pillars of finance: earning, saving, investing, and giving, we can be anxious in one of those areas, but in avoidant in another. So, for example, you might be an anxious earner making a lot of money, but if you're spending it all on stuff, right, then you're an avoidant saver, right? And there are some people who are really good at saving, but they're terrified of investing. And then there's people who are really good at investing, but they're terrified of giving, right? So these are different ways we can have we react to money in unhealthy ways.
Did you write this book because you had a money monster situation?
Oh
Or
yeah.
and walk us through the moment where you had to face your own stuff, because you're very clear on it and you're very forthright in where you fall. So how did you realize this?
Well, it was a lifetime of wisdom. I mean, it isn't one thing. It was like seeing all these different people in my life, including myself, who are struggling with money and my clients and blah blah blah, and it was like, what's the deal? Like for example, my dad. It kind of started with my family, of course, right? My father was, an executive for an oil company, and he had a good bit of money, but he was a good guy. He had a wonderful strengths and very loving in many ways. But when my family divorced when I was about 8, money became weaponized in my family. So like it became it became the only way we communicated really was by like, show love, you get stuff, you don't, you get kicked out, that kind of stuff. So I grew up with these money monsters around me, but I didn't know what they were. And so then I reacted against that, and then like hated my brothers, and I all just basically took a vow of poverty in different ways. I went and joined a monastery for 20 years, just thought money was the root of all evil. So I had this deep money monster inside me. My twin brother ran off and became a homesteader, like living off the land. And my older brother went and joined a moderately successful grunge band in Seattle. But like we all kind of basically took a poverty in very, very different ways because we had these money monsters from our childhood. But I didn't understand what they were. And then when I got to the monastery, it was like, oh, I thought I was going to give up money and not have to do anything with it ever again. But then what I realized is if you join a community where everybody hates money, right, that doesn't end very well. So the monastery at one point went bankrupt. And then like I had to go figure all that mess out and try to like what's like I just didn't understand. And I didn't understand the spirituality of money and like all the like oh my gosh, like I'll give you a quick example. Here was a big breakthrough for me. There was this one brother in the monastery, and I'll call him Brother Pius, and he refused to touch money because he thought it was impure, it would taint his soul, and whatever. So he didn't touch cash or credit cards or debit cards for years, and he thought this was going to be a path to like spiritual perfection. And ironically, what it did is it made him like it reinforced the bad parts of his ego. It made him more like it gave him a superiority complex to the rest of us who are running around trying to keep the roof from leaking. And so like that was a different kind of money monster than my dad, who had all this money. Like there were these two poles, and I just didn't understand how to like what's the deal and how do we find a healthy ground in the middle. And that's what both of my books are exploring. But I think in Taming Your Money Monsters, I've really nailed it. Like I just dialed it tight. And I think it's a funny, accessible, readable book, but it's got a gazillion brilliant ideas in it that I think people will really appreciate.
So can we talk about some of these monsters and what they look like and how we can identify them? Because I'm thinking, Brother Pius, yeah, I mean, for him to never touch money, and it's so terrible, but that's kind of naive, right? Because
Right.
he's living in the monastery. Someone's doing something with money. Like he's living somewhere, someone's paying the bills. So it's kind of like he put himself into this like vacuum, if you will, but that's not realistic. And then the monastery ended up going bankrupt, so it wasn't being handled correctly or appropriately. So obviously that's the extreme of sticking your head in the sand, right?
Right.
So what are some of these money monsters? And that's obviously we can identify that one right away, but what are some other ones that we can identify in ourselves through our Enneagrams?
So think of it like this. Um, you have to kind of do a little thought experiment with me. Imagine what it was like when you were in the womb, like when consciousness first flickered on for you. What was that like? And so, what that was like is what I would call unconscious unity, meaning you didn't have a sense of self yet. You didn't have an awareness of what's me and what's not me, because you were kind of in oneness and unity with your mom and everything around you, even though your experience is very, very limited. So then you get born, and surprise, there's more to the universe than just you. And there's a physical umbilical cord that gets cut, right? But then there's immediately this psychological umbilical cord that forms between you and your caregivers. And so your caregivers kind of like you could be kind of come your ego gets enmeshed with your caregivers in the first, like almost immediately, because they have to do the driving of reality for you. You're not aware of like even object permanence. That's a kind of an advanced concept that children need to learn. And so but over time your personality needs to grow and you need to individuate. You need to be able to differentiate between yourself and your parents and yourself and the rest of reality. Okay. But then that psychological umbilical cord has to get cut. And the only way to cut it is with sharp negative emotions, because positive emotions will just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. And so we know from the neurobiology, like in the mid limbic region of the mammalian brain, all mammals have this, especially including humans. You can even see this in rats. Is that the three core negative emotions are anger, sadness, and fear. So anger, sadness, and fear are the sharpest emotional knives, and all the other negative emotions are sort of like a admixture of those. Think of it like a color wheel. Like you can have all kinds of varieties of negative emotions, but they're all based on that fundamental neurobiological hardwiring. So your Enneagram type tells you which of those three negative emotional knives did most of the cutting. Was your psychological umbilical cord cut more by anger? Was it cut more by sadness or shame? Like sadness, shame are kind of the same in different ways. And then there's fear. And so there's three negative emotional knives, but then there's three ways to process each of those emotions. So you can either internalize that pain, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize that pain, which is like having a food fight with the world, or you can have both. So you can internalize it, externalize it, or have both. And that's why there's 9 personality types in the Enneagram. So then, for example, in my case, I got my psychological umbilical cord cut more by sadness and shame. And so that makes me what we call a type 3. But I both internalize that sadness and shame, which means I feel this sense of sadness or grief or shame about how I perceive myself. And then I also have this external sadness or shame, which means I feel this grief or sadness about how I think other people perceive me. And then what that does for my type, and this is true for every type, and there's no good or bad types. They're all, it's just like cars. You can have a good car, you can have a bad car. It doesn't depend on the model, it's irrelevant, right? But what it does is for each of us, it creates this unconscious, deepest fear. So we're all driving around with this deep fear that we have. And for me, what that is a deep sense of worthlessness. Like I feel this sort of ugh, like I'm not going to accomplish anything. I'm not worth anything. Like like, so I'm always looking for validation. So what it does is it creates my greatest fear of being worthless. And so what that means is type 3 is called the achiever. I call them the race car because what that means is we're always looking for external validation to assuage that deep sense of worthlessness. And so I always want to win the race, get the gold star, get the pat on the teacher's head, right? Start a company, whatever it is, right? Because all that external achievement is trying unconsciously to assuage that deep sense of worthlessness that I have. And then what that does is it creates our greatest vice. And so my greatest vice is what we would call deceit. And that doesn't mean I'm a liar. What it means is I'm always trying to put a mask on to like impress the people around me. And so type threes are these expert mask changers. We'll change our persona to fit the environment we're in at any point. So I can be, for example, I was in a prestigious college. I can be an academic. I can go, and I was in the Marine Corps, so I can go join the Marines. I can go join a monastery. I went and, was successful on Wall Street. Like I can just switch masks to try to find whatever the group around me thinks is important and will validate. And I'll try to like achieve whatever that is to the best of my ability. And that's
But
great.
are you still that person? I mean, you just named three very extreme roles that you've played. So are you pretending, or are you that deep down you can just kind of switch on and
Right.
off?
Well, that's a great question. Is type threes don't really know who they are because they're, at least at first in life, because they're so busy trying to wear these masks. It's like, who am I really inside? And that's a deep question we all need to explore, but it's one that type threes have the hardest problem with, is because we tend to lose. The reason I call them the race cars is because they're always gunning for the next achievement, but leaving their authentic selves in the dust. Uh-huh.
So just by one understanding your Enneagram, that can then help guide you as to why money can be an issue in your life.
Exactly. And so then if we layer on top of the Enneagram, the attachment theory of money, so we could either be anxiously attached to money or fearfully avoidant. And so then there's two unique money monsters for each Enneagram type. And so for the type 3, the two money monsters, I call them the barrier and the blinger. And so the barrier is like the ostrich who sticks their head in the sand because threes are so sensitive to shame. We're so sensitive to um, like social approval, our lack of financial literacy, our money mistakes, our maybe we don't enjoy dealing with money, or we're just don't have the skills because we've never developed them. Then money can create all this sadness or this shame, and so we tend to bury our heads in the sand and not want to look at it, and that can create all kinds of problems and multi-car pileups for us in our life, which was like me, right? I was just really avoidant around it. I just didn't want to look at it. And that's why, I ended up in a monastery, and the monastery went bankrupt. So I had to, and that was partly my responsibility as well for the bankruptcy for different reasons. And so I had to really like look inside myself and figure this stuff out. But then on the flip side of threes, I call them the blinger, because threes want approval and status so much, then they can become so concerned about making money, but then they tend to bling it out and spend it on big cars and fancy houses and the jewelry, even when their budget might not allow those things. They might, because social status symbols are a great way to get social approval. And since threes are so concerned about social approval, they tend to bling out their lives, and that and that looks good on the outside, but it's kind of like a Hollywood set where it's all cardboard and plastic on the outside, but it looks great on the outside, but it's all cardboard on the inside.
You talk about money wounds, which is a very powerful phrase. You mentioned you and your two brothers
Uh-huh.
who grew up in the same household. I'm sure you all are different Enneagrams. You're all different people, right? But
Yes.
you
Yep.
all reacted your own ways, similarly though, to the money wounds that happened when your parents divorced. But
Right.
I wonder, does your Enneagram determine how you react to different situations? Say you had a sister who is a
Right.
completely different Enneagram, and she may have
Right.
looked at the money wounds that you all experience and turned it in a completely different way. So
Of
is
course.
or like, do you have certain retention of experiences and interpret it and react to it different depending on your Enneagram?
Well, you're absolutely going to react to it different based on your Enneagram type. And that's what the book explores. Like, I'm just giving you one example for me. But both my brothers are different Enneagram types, but they're both were avoidant around money, but in different ways. So I was being a little glib, but basically, yeah, we had the same money wound, but it expressed in different ways for each of us.
What are money wounds, and how do we know if we have one or likely 20 different money wounds? And then what do we do about them?
Oh, we all have money wounds. Like, you can't get. It's like just like trying to get through life without trauma. Like, we all have our wounds. We all have our trauma. And we all have our issues around money, because money really does make the world go round. It's around us all the time. It's the tool for action in the world. We really can't act or do anything in life without money. And maybe here, let me just maybe take a super high level view really quickly and just try to sum it up in a nutshell. There's a good friend of mine, Richard Rohr. He always would say, if we don't transform our trauma, we're destined to transmit it, especially to those we love most, like our children. And that's true for all trauma. But the thing is that money, since it's the tool for most actions, becomes a great way to unconsciously transmit our trauma to the people around us when we misspend it or misuse it. And so what I'm really trying to explore in this book is, how do we heal our deepest traumas, our deepest psychological wounds, and then how do we stop using money to transmit that trauma? And more importantly, how then do we use money to transmit love and service and compassion to the world?
Well, that's so true, because we we're not taught money. I mean, financial literacy classes are coming up, and kids are being taught how to handle money, which is awesome. But a lot of people, they learn about money or subconsciously learn about money from the household they grew up in, so their parents, so whether their parents fought about money or they made negative comments about money, like rich people are bad, or, stuff like that, or we don't have money for that, or they're trying to take our money. So it's true. We're passing these on to our children, not consciously, likely
Right.
subconsciously, but
Right.
we think like what we're doing is completely normal because we're right, because it's our experience and it's the way we feel, but we're passing it on. So it's so true in that we need to acknowledge, well, what's our monster, and how do we not transmit that down to our children or the next generation?
Exactly right. You nailed it.
Um, so really, how though do you realize, because someone may say, well, like, I do think, money is bad, or I do think rich people are bad, or I do think they're trying to take my money, and they feel so correct in their position. How do we kind of recognize or take a step back of, there could be some truth to what you say, but that really might just be your wound speaking? How do we really take that step
Okay,
backwards and look at it?
this might be a shocking thing for you and your readers to think about, but I think it's pretty self-evident, is that there's no be a decent human being switch that flips on or off depending on the size of your bank balance. Right? There, there's no correlation whatsoever. There are so many wealthy people out there that are loving, kind, generous, using their wealth to serve and love the world with all their heart and all their soul. And then there's real jerks out there who are doing just the opposite with their billions, right? And the same thing is true on the poverty level. Like, I'm not trying to like go to any slum or barrio. Like, you're probably going to see some problems there. Let's put it that way. Poverty doesn't make you a good person, and wealth doesn't make you a good person. Those things just don't correlate whatsoever.
And why do you think we create that correlation? We create this correlation and we try to justify it. Why do we do that?
Well, I mean, the other thing to think about is money is power, right? So people who have a lot of power, they can use it well and they can use it badly. And again, I'm trying to teach people how to use that power ethically and responsibly. But then there's jealousies, there's resentment, there's bitterness, especially when the economic system has oppressed you. Like if the whole economic reality you grew up in has just been demonizing and oppressing you and marginalizing you, then you're probably going to hate that whole system, right? It's a natural reaction. But the problem isn't money itself, it's how we're using it.
Let's talk about those 9 paths to money mastery from your book.
Mhm.
What's one path that totally surprised you? Something people don't expect to be part of when mastering money?
Huh, that's an interesting question. So here's a surprise. So the path are the 9 types, right? So there's 9 Enneagram types, right? You need to understand your type, and then you need to understand the 2 money monsters for your type. But perhaps one of the biggest surprises was understanding my marriage and why it fell apart, because understanding my money monsters in relationship to my partner's money monsters and how those were just feeding each other in an unhealthy way.
That's interesting. Do you find that people are kind of attracted to their opposite money monsters, just like opposites attract?
Right. So here's this is not in the book. This is a bit of a sidebar, but here's what I've learned about the Enneagram is don't date your wings. Meaning, so there's these 9. So you have to think of these 9 types drawn in a circle. Think of like a pie, and then they're all kind of drawn like on a color wheel, and there's 9 of them. Try not to date numbers that are next to you because those are the types that are they're the ones you're most opposite from. They're also the ones you're most likely to be attracted to, but they're also the ones that you're going to trigger each other the most.
Interesting. So, on what date do we give someone an Enneagram? Because if we're most attracted to them, we're going to have to cut this off pretty quickly if we identify that they're one of our wings.
You gotta find out quick. Like it's the first thing I try to be subtle about it. I try to be a jerk about it, but it's like the first thing I want to know when I meet somebody is what's your Enneagram type and are we compatible? And I'm pretty good at identifying people kind of off the cuff for the most part. But you got to really ask the questions and figure it out. I could help you figure out your type.
Yeah, let's do it because I have no idea what mine is. I didn't know what an Enneagram was before I started this conversation, so I'm very curious as to where I could end up.
But first, the question is in your darkest emotional moments, when life gets really rough for you, which negative emotion do you tend to feel more of? Do you feel more anger, sadness and shame, or fear?
Sadness.
Sadness. Okay. So then that puts you in the sadness triad. So that means you're probably a type 2, 3, or 4. Okay. So then let me ask you this question. Well, first, are you more of an introvert or more of an extrovert or an ambivert?
I like my alone time. I like to be alone, but I get my energy from going out, being with people and talking with people. But then I have enough of it and then I need to go home. So it goes out, it fills me up, and then that gives me the energy I need. But I can't do both.
So you're an ambivert. Okay, that helps a little bit. It doesn't narrow it down. It narrows down a little bit. Okay, well maybe let's talk about the 3 deepest fears. Let me give you 3 choices and see if any of these resonates with you. If you and this is a hard one, so you got to kind of just sit with it for a minute. Take your time. Option 1: Do you feel is your greatest fear that you're unlovable? Do you feel a sense that like you're always trying to earn love and validation from the people around you? That's choice 1. Choice 2: Do you feel the sense of worthlessness like me that you don't really have any value in the world. And so you're always trying to achieve things to assuage that sense of worthlessness. That's another choice. Or do you feel like you don't have a unique identity? Are you always trying to like find your place and stand out and be different?
The unlovable.
Unlovable. Yeah. So that would be a type 2. We call them the helper. See if this tracks for you. But what types 2 for them is they have this fear of being unlovable. So they're always kind of running around helping other people, being of great service. They're very warm. They're very kind. They're very sweet and generous. But they're always trying to get that love from the people around them by complimenting them, giving them gifts, helping them out, being of service. But the problem with the 2 is it's unconscious that what they really want is they're kind of playing this game of give to get. Like, I'll give you this love, but I want you to really, what you're really looking for is validation. You want people to validate you and connect with you because that will give you that sense of lovability, that let you know that you're loved. Does that track for you?
That does. Could like people pleasing and stuff like that fall into that? The inability to say no when
That's
something's asked of you?
that's exactly it. That's exactly the 2. You've nailed it. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Then I would say your assessment's pretty straight on.
Great. So for the 2, then you have 2 money monsters, and then there's a path to money mastery, right? So we're just talking about the monsters here, but then there's a whole nother step to getting to money mastery. But for the 2, I call your money monsters the bleeder and the bonder. And what I mean by that, the bleeder is someone who tends to bleed out their time, their money, their resources, helping other people, but they often deplete themselves in the process. So that's one money monster 2s can have. And the other one, as I call them, the bonder, meaning they might be money anxious, they might have a lot of wealth, but they tend to well, think of there's a story with the parable. It's you can give a person a fish, but it's better to teach them to fish, right? That. And so the type 2 is someone who would rather give someone a fish every day, like with a side of tartar sauce and you're an amazing note, rather than teach the person to fish, because that would stop the gratitude coming back to them that they're so desperately looking for.
That makes a lot of sense. I have 4 children and it's like I cannot do any more for you. Like I do everything. I also have the thinking of I'll just do it instead of teaching you to do it. I'll just do it for you. So yes.
And here's where you can get in trouble though, is because this is the problem with the 2s is you're giving all this, but what you may or may not be aware of is that unconsciously what you want from them is to love you for all that giving. And if they don't reciprocate, if they don't turn around and give you that validation you're looking for, then you're going to get resentful. And that's another way. And you you're kind of like this cuddly, cute teddy bear that suddenly grows claws and fangs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, you got it.
Right.
That is that I'm impressed. I'm not gonna lie. I was curious where we were gonna go with it. I'm like, all right, let's see if we can, nail me in a couple of questions.
And so for a money master, Sherry, for a type 2 is what I call the beloved. Right. So the beloved is someone who has got their financial house in order. They've got earning, saving, investing, and giving down. But so the 2 where you're probably most going to have the trouble is the giving, because you tend to overgive, right? But you need to first take care of the earning, saving, investing first. That needs to come. That's your first priority. Then once you're financially secure, then the giving can come. But more importantly, what 2s need to learn is they need to learn to give without strings attached. They need to learn that when I give and I give help, first of all, they have to set healthy boundaries. They need to learn to stop over giving and over people pleasing, because that will just burn you out. But then when you do give, because 2s are so lovable, like they're just great. I love 2s. But the thing you need to do is that when you do give, you need to emotionally cut the strings, because your giving tends to be conditional. it's based on these unconscious needs you're really looking for. And when those needs don't get, it's a little like it's a pay to play scheme you're doing your whole life in a weird way. And when you can cut the conditionality of your help, then your giving becomes more authentic, and you also are able to be more grounded in yourself when you do that.
That makes a lot of sense. Giving, but cutting the emotion out of it. Give for the sake of giving, not giving. And not to say you want something in return, but you kind of want something in return. I mean, you want the love, or you want something back from whoever you're giving to. So just give for the sake of giving without expectation.
You nailed it.
When you discover your Enneagram, obviously you're naming pros and cons of each of them, right? And I think it's important to not only acknowledge the pros, but really understand the cons and how, this shows up in your everyday life and kind of how to be prepared for it. So would you say once someone understands their Enneagram and the way they think and all this, one, things just start to kind of make more sense, but then also how can they catch themselves in day-to-day life and go, oh, that's a monster coming through, or how do we shoo that monster away? What are some practices to kind of catch ourselves?
Well, first you have to know what they are, right? And then I have an exercise in the book where it's called your Money Monster and Money Master chart. So I encourage readers to like make a chart of the ways that they have where their money monsters show up in the four pillars of finance: earning, saving, investing, and giving. And then what are the counter moves they need to make, whether they're anxious or avoidant. So it really just depends on your Enneagram type, and it depends on what your money monsters are. But once you've identified them, then that's half the battle. And then just being mindful about where they're showing up, and that's where you need to put your time and attention and focus. I give all the Enneagram types different car names. So I call myself the race car, but type twos, I call you the ambulance.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
Because you're always running helping everybody, right?
You're running around helping, and then if people don't move out of your way, you're like honking and move out of the way. And that's kind of where you said the teddy bear with the claws coming out, right? What are some other of the cars that you have?
All right, I'll just go around real quick.
Okay.
I'll give you a quick summary of the 9 types. So I'll start with the 8. So type 8, I call them the Hummer or the Challenger. So they're basically they have this deep externalized fear. So they're always pushing against the boundaries of reality. They're always challenging everyone around them. 2 examples would be Donald Trump. And another example would be Martin Luther King Jr. They're both 8s, right? They're both just pushing against whatever the boundaries are around them, and they can be healthy or unhealthy. Type 1 is we call them they're sometimes called the peacemaker. I call them the RV of egos. So they kind of like they don't. So they're almost the opposite of 8s. They hate conflict, and so they want everything around them as peaceful as possible. But because they have a hard time with conflict, a lot of their problems don't get resolved, right? So they want things harmonious, but they're sometimes not willing to have the fight necessary to solve and get to real harmony that comes after a conflict is resolved. So that's why I call them the RV of egos, because they can't stay parked in the campground chilling out by the campfire. Then there's type 1s, and they're often called the improver. I call them the BMW of egos because they're precision engineered, but they require a fair bit of maintenance. So they have this internalized anger, and so their fear is being bad or defective. So they're hyper perfectionistic. They're kind of like so they're always trying to improve themselves, but they're always also trying to improve the world around them. But they can get a little, they can be a little temperamental at times. Let's put it that way. And then we've got the type 2, which is the ambulance, which we talked about for you. And then we've got the type 3, which is the race car, which we talked about for me. And then type 4, I call them, they're called the individualist. Let me just make sure type 4 is the individualist. I call them the custom car. So type 4s hate the Enneagram more than any other type, because type 4 is the box for people who hate to be put in a box. So type 4s always want to be different because their fear is that they don't have a unique identity. So they're always trying to stand out and stand apart and be different. So they're the great artists, they're the great counterculturists, they're the great avant-garde, people in the world. And they have this high level of creativity, but they kind of against. They have a knee-jerk reaction against conventionality, and sometimes that gets them into trouble because sometimes convention is bad, but sometimes convention is good. It requires a bit of discernment. And then you've got type 5, which I call them the compact car. They're often called the investigator. So type 5s, they have this deep internalized fear that they're not capable or competent. So they're the great brainiacs of the Enneagram, but they're very reserved. Think Dr. Spock from Star Trek. Like they observe things very analytically, and they're always taking information and ideas in and trying to figure them out in their head, but then they kind of get stuck in their head and they have a hard time letting anything out. So they're very emotionally reserved, very taciturn, and that's a type 5. I call them a compact car because they have a very small gas tank for social interaction, but they can also fit into tight mental spaces where other people fear to tread. So, every one of us each one has a strength and a weakness. And then type 6, they're often called the skeptic or the loyalist. I call them the family sedan because type 6s live in a great deal of fear, that they fear that they don't have the resources to protect themselves, but they also are afraid that the external world isn't going to protect them either. So they're always looking for safety. They're sort of, when they walk into a room, they know where the exit signs are. And they're always sort of worst case scenario thinkers. But they're very, and type 6s have a hard time making decisions sometimes because they have this committee of voices in their head and they're always catastrophizing. So when they do make a decision and they do commit to a person, to a place, to an ideology, they're very, very loyal to it. So they make great friends. So type 6s are great people to have on your side because they're going to stand with you through thick and thin, but they also are looking for safety at every turn. And then lastly, we have the type 7, which is sometimes called the enthusiast. I call them the SUV of egos because they're always ready for the off-road adventure. They're sort of the go anywhere, do anything ego of the Enneagram, as long as it doesn't mean sitting in the present moment with any of their pain. So type 7s have this constant FOMO or fear of missing out. They're always looking for more, like what's next? What's the new exciting thing? What's the new shiny idea, object, person, place, whatever? And they're also very intelligent, can be very intelligent and very creative, but they have a hard time sitting still. And basically, all that adventurism is a way of outrunning their inner pain. Because their greatest fear is pain or privation. So they never want their resources to run out. They would never want their opportunities to run out. So that can get them into all kinds of trouble, and that's why I call them. But that's why they're also a lot of fun. 7s are great. I actually like 7s a lot. They're one of my favorite types to hang out with. So it's a really quick summary of the 9 types. And of course, there's infinite variety inside each of those.
That's fantastic. And does your book goes through each Enneagram and kind of the strengths and the weaknesses and the money monsters for each of them?
Exactly.
For someone listening who has no idea what Enneagram type they are, or maybe someone who thinks they're all types depending on the day, what is one best way for them to figure it out without Googling and going down that rabbit hole?
Okay, so there's a lot of tests out there you can take online, and all the free ones are about they're worth what you pay for them. Most of them are kind of useless. A couple, some of them are about 50% accurate, so they may give you your type, they may not. But there's one that I really like, and it's called the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test. It's about 95% accurate, and it's the most scientifically rigorous test out there.
If a listener only remembers one thing from this episode, what's the big takeaway, the shift you want them to walk away with about money and who they are?
I want them to learn how to build wealth ethically, and I want them to learn how to use that wealth to heal the crack in the world that they were designed to fix.